All right, buckle up, everybody, because today we are diving into a question that is truly huge. And I mean, really huge. We're talking about what would happen if we just went and detonated all the nukes on planet Earth at once.
Well, the science behind this, this question, it's fascinating, really.
Yeah, it's not about like fear mongering or anything. Like, what would the science actually tell us? You sent in some pretty incredible articles and videos for this. And I got to say, some of the insights are, well, pretty wild.
Yeah, and it's important to remember that we aren't talking about just a few bombs here. The world's nuclear arsenal right now is estimated to be about 15,000 warheads. It's almost impossible to actually picture that many.
Yeah, until you start thinking about what they can do. One of the sources you sent in had this really interesting way of putting it. They said, like, imagine we use 3 warheads per city on average.
And that would be enough to, well, wipe every single city off the face of the earth. And even then, we'd still have some nukes left over.
Yeah, it's like overkill doesn't even begin to cover it, right?
Yeah. It's really difficult to even wrap your head around
Yeah.
that kind of destructive power. Like, think about Krakatoa, the eruption back in 1883. That was one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions that we've ever recorded, and it released a mind-boggling amount of energy. But with nukes, we're talking about something thousands of times more powerful.
Okay, so let's try and like put this into some perspective, right? Let's imagine we take all 15,000 warheads, every single one, and we just pile them all up
Okay.
right in the middle of the Amazon rainforest,
Okay.
and then we detonate them all at the exact same time. Boom.
Well, you might think you'd need a massive, massive facility just to hold all those weapons, but the reality is actually pretty surprising. It's likely that you could fit all those warheads in, well, a relatively small warehouse.
A warehouse.
Yeah, just shows you how concentrated that nuclear energy really is.
That just blows my mind. I was picturing something way bigger. So, like, what happens right at the moment, this stockpile goes off? What would we see?
So the initial fireball, well, that would stretch 50 kilometers across. And that means everything within that radius would basically be vaporized instantly. And the blast wave from that would just flatten more than 3,000 square kilometers of rainforest.
3,000 square kilometers. I mean, that's bigger than some countries, right?
Yeah, it is. And on top of that, the shock wave. Imagine this sound. It's so powerful that it circles the earth for weeks, just echoing and echoing.
Oh, man, I bet Krakatoa would sound like, like a whisper compared to that. And I can only imagine, like, what that mushroom cloud would look like.
I mean, it would be pushing right up to the edge of space. You're talking about a mushroom cloud reaching the very outer edges of the stratosphere.
Yeah, that's a powerful image, just like, drives home the scale of that energy release. So obviously this is not good news for Brazil, but what about the rest of the world? Like, what would the global impact of something like this be?
The immediate blast zone, that would be uninhabitable for decades, of course. But one of the articles you sent me that goes into some of the far-reaching consequences, like the fires from this explosion, they could spread across the entire continent, causing massive devastation. And then there's the fallout. The amount of radioactive material in the environment globally, it would double.
So basically, everywhere on Earth is going to have twice as much radioactive material.
Which would mean a significant increase in the risk of cancer and a lot of other health problems all around the world.
Right, and we aren't even considering the whole, nuclear winter thing, are we? I know you highlighted a whole section about that in one of the articles.
Absolutely. All that dust and debris that gets hurled into the atmosphere that could block out the sun, and that could lead to a global drop in temperature. We could be talking about a temperature drop for several years.
So that scenario, that's just the nukes we have right now. What if, and I know this is getting a little dark, but what if we mined all of Earth's uranium and turned it all into nukes?
Well, then you're taking us from, a regional catastrophe to what could be an extinction-level event. I mean, think about it. There's enough uranium in the Earth's crust to build millions of warheads.
Millions.
If you were to unleash the energy equivalent of 10 billion Hiroshima bombs.
10 billion.
Yeah, that's the kind of firepower we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you were to picture all of those, it would be like a cube 3 kilometers high.
A 3-kilometer high cube of pure nuclear destruction.
Whoa. And where does the Amazon rainforest even fit into this scenario?
Well, honestly, it matters a lot less in this case because the effects would be truly global. This hypothetical cube, upon detonation, it would create a fireball that would be visible from space. I mean, the ground wouldn't just break, it would splash like water, forming a crater 100 kilometers across. Entire mountain ranges would just vaporize in an instant.
I remember that one source you sent in had this vivid description of material being ejected into space and some of it just lost to the Earth forever. Absolutely. And the stuff that falls back down that heats the atmosphere to, you know, unimaginable temperatures. We'd be talking global firestorms and the nuclear winter. We'd be talking about a nuclear winter lasting decades. It would be far more severe than anything we saw in that first scenario. And we have to think about the long-term consequences, not just the immediate impact. The stuff you highlighted in your research, like the really long-term stuff.
Yeah, the source talked about these earthquakes, powerful enough to, like, shake the entire planet to its core. That's pretty bleak.
Yeah, and it's pretty realistic too, unfortunately. Extinction of large animals, including us. Yeah, it'd be almost guaranteed. Even if people managed to survive, like in bunkers or something, they'd come out to a world that's totally inhospitable.
I mean, it's almost hard to even imagine, the sheer scale of it all. But you mentioned earlier that the Earth would recover eventually. Like, after all this, life would find a way, right?
Yeah, it's a testament to how resilient life is. I mean, life on Earth has survived asteroid impacts, volcanic eruptions, ice ages, you name it, every time. It bounces back, even if it's in different forms. So yeah, a nuclear apocalypse will be a massive setback, but over millions of years, the planet would heal, new ecosystems would pop up, and evolution would take some pretty fascinating turns.
So what we're talking about is a landscape that's totally alien compared to what we know today. What kinds of creatures could even evolve in a world like that, after a nuclear apocalypse?
Well, it's impossible to say for sure. But we can look at what we know about evolutionary pressures and make some guesses.
Yeah.
Like anything resistant to radiation, that would have a huge advantage. So maybe we'd see like these bizarre radiation-resistant megafauna,
Hmm.
creatures thriving in environments that would just kill us.
It's kind of terrifying, but also kind of fascinating to think about. It's like a whole new chapter in Earth's history, one that, we started, even if we wouldn't be around to see it.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine future paleontologists, millions of years from now, digging up what's left of our civilization, and they find this layer of radioactive isotopes, this marker in the rock that shows our nuclear folly. What would they think of us?
I mean, what would that layer even say? It'd be like a giant warning sign for any intelligent species that finds it, right?
Yeah, I mean, they'd see proof of a species that was super ingenious, but also a species that was brought down by its own destructive tendencies. Our nuclear weapons, those show how advanced we were, but using them, that would just point to this fatal flaw.
Like a species that could split the atom but couldn't get past its own internal conflicts?
Mm.
Pretty sobering.
Yeah, and this is why we look into these apocalyptic scenarios, not to focus on the doom and gloom, but to, use these thought experiments and hold up a mirror to ourselves. We have to understand the potential consequences of what we do.
It's about facing the power that we have and the huge responsibility that comes with that power. This isn't just science fiction. These weapons are real, and the choices we make today, those have consequences for generations to come, maybe even for the future of all life on Earth.
You're absolutely right. Knowledge is power, but it comes with a heavy weight. Understanding what could happen in a full-scale nuclear war, well, that should make us want to take action.
Yeah.
It reminds us how important diplomacy is, cooperation, and taking care of our planet.
So we've gone through the immediate aftermath of a nuclear war, the long-term impacts on the environment, and even imagined the creatures that could live on an irradiated Earth. But I want to bring up one last thing. Remember those future archaeologists we talked about? The ones digging up the pieces of our civilization?
Yeah, the ones putting the puzzle of our past back together.
Imagine we could leave them a message, a warning, a lesson, a plea for them to do better. What would we tell them?
That's a big question. What message would you leave knowing what we know?
That's a really tough one. There's just so much we could say, so many warnings to give them, but would they even get it? They'd be looking at us through, millions of years of evolution, their whole world shaped by what we did.
Yeah, but maybe the message wouldn't need to be about, like, the nitty-gritty of nukes or how we messed up. Maybe it'd be more about the thinking that got us there in the first place.
So less about the what and more about the why, like the human side of things.
Right. We could try to show them the dangers of thinking only about right now. The dangers of, like, chasing power and getting stuck in that us versus them mindset.
Yeah, those are the things that could trip up any intelligent species, right? Doesn't matter what their tech is like.
Exactly. And by showing them those flaws, maybe they could learn from our mistakes and not repeat them. Like we're holding up this mirror and saying, hey, watch out for this. You could end up like us.
I like that. It's a message that goes beyond like tech and time. It's about wisdom and compassion and, realizing that we're all connected. In that source you sent, the one with those future archaeologists, there was this line that really stuck with me. It said that these future beings, they'd probably be very, very confused by what they found.
Confused for sure,
Mhm.
but hopefully they'd also want to learn from it, you know?
How?
Imagine them putting the pieces of our history together, trying to understand how we could be so smart but also do something so destructive.
It's definitely sobering, but it's also a good reminder that we can still change things. We could be the ones to break the cycle, to learn from the past and build a future where these apocalypse scenarios are just thought experiments.
Exactly.
So we started by asking what would happen if we detonated all the nukes. And yeah, we went through some pretty terrifying scenarios, but I think the biggest thing to take away from all this is hope. Like, if we understand the consequences, really understand them, we can make better choices. Choices that lead us to a future where that doesn't happen.
You put it perfectly. This wasn't about the end of the world. This was about a new beginning, a beginning where knowledge and compassion and taking care of our planet, those are the things that guide us.
So, to all of you listening, we'll leave you with this. The future isn't set in stone. It's more like, a canvas.
Yeah.
And we have the brushes. It's up to us to make something good. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.